What's up, Gestalt Education Nation? Today's episode is brought to you by The Payday Practice and our good friends Jeff Langmaid and Jason Deach.
So how would Seth Godin, Gary Vee, and Tim Ferriss create a chiropractic practice? The answer is in this book right here. So our good friends Jeff Langmaid and Jason Deach, they created the Payday Practice to basically show you how you cover your monthly expenses in one day every month. Guaranteed. Generating monthly recurring revenue in your practice can create financial freedom, eliminate chronic financial stress, and turn the first day of each month from damn, it's time to start over to payday.
Get a free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com. The Payday Practice will show you the exact step-by-step process that you can use to generate monthly recurring revenue in your practice. Get your free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Gestalt Education Podcast. Brett, we're at home. We've kind of taken a little bit of a break for a little bit, which is kind of nice. We were just talking about offline. So the last year has been a whirlwind, to say the least, hasn't it?
Yeah, I guess when you start something, you think it's going to be good, you think it's going to be successful, but I guess we probably had no idea that it was going to do what it did, and now we got to live up to it.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing we have heard from listeners and from you guys is that you would like us to have a little bit more dialogue of just Brett and I, and maybe breaking down some of the things that our guests have said, or us kind of riffing on other things like that. And so we're going to really make an effort to do it. To be honest with you, we had planned to do this all along, but then the guests just kept on coming.
Just kept coming.
Oh my gosh! And so we had some just incredible people, things that I'd never in my lifetime would have imagined us doing. Sitting down with James Andrews or Michael Gervais or Mike Leahy, all these little things has just been pretty insane.
Yeah, I think even myself, if you go back through, there's so many clinical pearls embedded in those podcasts that, if you have the time, I would go back on some of those, because some of those were so good, and we kept rolling out new podcasts. So I felt like we didn't have enough time to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how good a certain person was in a certain area. Just as an example, I thought, Mike Leahy outperformed what I thought he was going to do. I thought he was so good as far as giving advice to a young clinician. James Andrews is James Andrews. I mean, that guy, he is just a walking icon. And just on and on and on and on. So I think everyone, if you listen to it one time, go back and listen to some more. I've been doing it, and I'm picking up so many things that kind of got glossed over, honestly, just because we try to do it every week, so you just kind of you can barely keep up with it all.
And the one thing I'm learning too is it's tough to be 100% engaged in a podcast. We're thinking about the next questions and stuff, so I get so much more out of the follow up of re-listening to it when I edit it and stuff like that. So anyway, we have some. It's not. This isn't to say that we don't have any more guests on the horizon.
Oh no, because
we've definitely we got some awesome things, but I think we're going to try to make this a permanent mainstay of talking more about what we're going to talk about today, which we started it really early on, the top secrets in practice, and today we're going to kind of dive into something, Brett. You talked about, I've seen you talk, I don't know, maybe the most out of anybody in your career in the last 5 years, but you talked, you had 3 1-hour lectures at Park Orlando, and your first hour was something I've never seen you talk about, which was this idea of something outside of treatment that makes a great clinician. Mm-hmm. Intangibles, you've said, things that really make great healers, not just great chiropractors.
Right, and I always call this the it factor, and this is basically the explanation of, we all know amazing chiropractors who have little tiny practices that nobody knows about, and then we all know people that, in our profession that we're maybe not proud of, or that we wouldn't consider them to be good. However, they have this big old booming practice. So I feel like in the last 5 years of my life, I've tried long and hard to kind of figure out how we can bring this evidence-based group up to that level. And what it ends up being is, because this evidence-based group chiropractors, and we're all in the same boat, we're taught to question everything. Mm-hmm. And because we're taught to question everything, we sometimes lose our confidence and our certainty in delivering our message. And because of that, it basically gets conveyed to the patient is maybe not being, competent with the information, because you're always questioning yourself what's going on. And because in a way, it's almost like the evidence-based group that we're talking about, our listeners, we almost need to be a little bit more evangelistic than we are probably. And the other side needs to be less, and they need to up their clinical game up. But I think, in looking back in my first 20 years, I think the understated thing is you need to be a great clinician, and we are trying very, very hard with Gestalt education to work on that. But I think we'd be snowing everybody if we didn't expose some of these other intangibles that are absolutely critical and vital for being a great clinician. And the thing is, it's just not taught to you in school. Like that's the hard part. And a lot of these things, I think too, chiropractors, some of the traditional chiropractors have always been great healers. They get miracle after miracle after miracle. And then these evidence-based chiropractors, they still get a desired outcome. They get results, but they're not getting these crazy results. And I think part of the reason is because of the message isn't being delivered as good as it could. And I always tell the story when I was doing my preceptorship at CIHP with Dr. Skaggs. He brought in Stu McGill. And so Clayton said to me, find a really difficult patient that we're working with. So I found one. And this lady, she's a 10 out of 10, kind of in the chronic pain category. But I'll never forget, I had done a solid hip hinge with her. We were cat cameling. We were doing McGill's Big 3 at the time. And she's no better. She's still a 10 out of 10. And Stu walks in and basically sees the exact same case, basically does the exact same thing, and literally pulls a rabbit out of a hat, does nothing different except for he came with so much certainty and confidence, and just his ability to coach is, such at a world-class level. And he got a completely different outcome by doing the same thing. And I learned a valuable lesson at that point in my life, that who and how the message is delivered makes a difference. So, and everyone's going to have their own shtick. We always say, there can't be two Elvises. When we see somebody try to emulate Elvis, it's never a good thing. Right. So you got to kind of find your way. Some people, like Annie O'Connor, who's been on our podcast, empathy, sense of humor, motivating. Dr. Stu McGill, just an amazing coach. Dr. Pablo Colaj, just so world class with his results. Everybody's kind of got their own shtick in this, and you got to kind of figure it out. And if you don't figure it out, then usually you'll be out of practice.
And I think a good story even for me is the same thing as like being in a group practice. This happens to young clinicians too, is like you feel like you're not getting the outcome fast enough. So you're like, oh, okay, well, go see my mentor. I've sent people to you early on. Like, go see Brett. He'll figure it out. And again, I come, okay, so what'd you do? Like, cool stuff. Would do next exercise? You're like, no, just stay the course. I didn't do anything different.
I did 10 press-ups.
Yes, exactly. And so, but again, like if you don't have that confidence to just kind of continue on that path and take some leaps, then it's tough to get those results.
The other elephant in the room, I would say, for all the young clinicians out there, or the people that are still kind of growing their practice, is you have got to be bought in on function. Like, if you cannot do that, it is going to be very, very challenging for you to keep these cases on board, because there's so many complicating factors for why people have their pain. So you need to give yourself enough time to be successful. So you need to basically, not dig your heels in on that. Like, basically embrace the functional approach. And I think when it's done well, the patient understands that, and it is so liberating for you, because if you're going, treatment to treatment, trying to like, how's your pain today? How's your pain? It's exhausting. I'm telling you, I've been there. I guess the one thing I don't know for myself is, when I first started, I really felt that I could fix or create a miracle in 3 visits with everybody. So you do develop your reputation in a good way early on by doing that. Now I'm definitely not in that model. But so what I don't know is, like, maybe when you start, maybe you are more that way until you kind of, get your reputation, and then people will be on board for whatever you're selling.
I mean, I can speak for myself. It's definitely the pressure that you feel, early on, those first couple of years. Like, you got to figure out, you got to have a couple, 2 or 3 miracles. And once you get those couple, 2 or 3 miracles, which is why we always say, like, if you're not invested into MDT and McKinsey, you're missing out on those miracles that could jumpstart your career, basically. I mean, my story is one of the high schools I worked with had an athlete that luckily he was a catcher, couldn't throw it or back to the pitcher. Shoulder hurt too bad, blah, blah. Had been everywhere. Saw him. I did literally 20 shoulder extensions, cleared up everything, and it was gone. That was a complete miracle, and thank goodness I had it. But then that jumpstart my career of like, okay, then I had to reproduce that with some other athletes, and that kind of got me in with that. So I think early on, it's not a bad thing to look for those little low-hanging fruits and those miracles, but understanding that every case doesn't fit into that.
And I mean, so what can the clinician say? Let's talk about that. So I mean, some of the analogies I give to my patients is, Mrs. Jones, if you get the flu today, of course we all want to be better tomorrow, but we kind of know we got 5 days of hell coming up, and your low back episode, your shoulder problem, it may not be 5 days. This may be a 3 to 4 week process, but basically letting them know that on the front end makes your life so much easier. And to change function, that's what you need. I mean, we all can change pain in a second by sticking a needle in it, by giving you prednisone. But to truly, be changing the function of a human being, you're going to need time on your side. And I'll just say it's going to be minimally 3 weeks and probably more in most of these patients, 4 to 6 weeks minimum for us to truly change function. And a lot of these people need us following up in their lives. And so I like that analogy. The other one is, most of us who've lived in America, we like our teeth straight, so we've all had braces. And you don't put braces on your teeth and the next day be like, oh, my teeth are straight. Like, this is a long, painful process to change, the function of our teeth in that example. But, changing function with our patients, I think that's a great analogy. And the patients really kind of grab onto that, and they understand that when it's framed that way. And the other thing too, like if you can get in a habit of always talking about changing their health and changing function instead of talking finances, I think the second is, it's kind of like if you're at a timeshare, like the feeling you get when you walk in there, it's just like, oh, or like when you're buying a car, whatever it might be. We all know that, what a horrible feeling. But, if somebody, if you're able to establish that rapport early on, people just want to be around you. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And I mean, you got one earth costume, you got one body, so to me, it's like a lot of my patients, they take better care of their cars than they do their body, so I just always try to exude how important it is to eat well, this functional medicine model, but also who's not going to benefit from us looking at trigger point tension tone, looking at joint blockage, looking at neurologic function, looking at function in general, don't be needing to kick them out the door. That's like the biggest mistake probably most of our, these people that are in this group that we're in do, is they're wanting to kick these people out when really these people are clamoring for what the consumer is basically telling us they want this right now.
Right.
So if you don't offer that service right now, either they're not going to come back to see you or they're going to go somewhere else to get it.
Right. It's kind of timely. Our new sponsor is Jeff Landmaid and Jason Dees on the Payday Practice. And one of the ways of having recurring revenue in your practice is actually to keep your patients around.
Right.
That's we talked about
that shouldn't be the number one reason, but that's a benefit of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And like we always say, you go to the dentist, do you not?
Yeah.
Come back, get adjusted. Like that's an easy story that you can tell patients as well. You have a difficult job. You're a laborer, man. Like, you treat your body like shit. I know you're not going to change your diet. I know you're not going to work out and stuff like that. It's okay. But then, as an insurance policy, come back and see us. Make sure that we hopefully head off these big events like we had last time. And it's not to say that you're never going to have back pain or whatever again, but hopefully the recovery time will be less, and that's what we all want. We don't want these 3 or 4 week blow-ups. We want 2 or 3 days where we feel like crap, and then we get better. So.
I think too the other mistake that's made to your point, Taylor, is that people are not doing a good job of explaining to the patient why they're there. Because if you've only played the pain game, you can't blame the patient at that point. Once they're out of pain, they're like, well, and I always tell everyone who will listen, if the reason they're canceling is canceled appointment not needed, we love it because that means you're getting an outcome, you're getting a good result. However, it also means you probably haven't educated them on function. So that's a telltale sign for the young clinician. If the secretary's fielding a bunch of calls saying, yeah, so-and-so doesn't need to come in, At first, it's a little bit of an ego stroke. You're like, oh, great. And then you're like, okay, that probably means I didn't educate him, So, and the problem with that case is if the function has not been changed, then they're on their way to a relapse. So.
Well, Brett, what about, there can't be any research about this kind of stuff, is there?
Yeah, so that's, I actually had originally given this presentation, I can't remember where or when, but it was basically about everything we're talking about. So at the time, I did a bunch of research on being a good clinician. And as it turns out, there's plenty of good research. Some of the things are not surprising. I mean, once you hear them, you're like, okay, that makes sense. But then I think sometimes it's hard for the young clinicians to kind of see like what that actually means in the treatment room setting. I would also say that, just to kind of throw this out there, Gray Cook, Shirley Sarman, other people that you think that would be, okay, we're going to get these people better and kick them out. I have had conversations or heard them talk about, Shirley Sarman on a podcast, how we actually should be checking up with these people. Like, just like you check up with your cardiologist, your endocrinologist. So to think that that's really far-fetched isn't, but I think like the thing you almost got to mind F yourself into doing is the reason the orthopedists have such great certainty and confidence and sometimes cockiness is because they look at an MRI result and they say you have a torn medial meniscus. Their only option is surgery, so we'll see you for surgery next week. Whereas the chiropractor will just, and PT will hem-haw around like, well, I think it's instead of just saying, this is what's wrong with you, this is what we're going to do to fix it, this is how you know you're going to be better, this is how you're going to be, how we know your function's going to be better. And let's just say that you're struggling with that even. Well, we always say the camcorder at the crime scene is range of motion. Like, start there. I mean, is there more to it than that? Of course there is. But, range of motion is a great starting point if you don't know where to start as far as like a functional outcome.
Right. Well, take us through some of these these tips that you've kind of excluded from the research and stuff.
So there was I whittled it down to 10, and one of them was experts value participation of others, patients, family, and other healthcare professionals. So here we're in a multidisciplinary practice, so you better learn quickly to learn how to work with other people. So I think, the common mistake early on is, and this is basically insecurity, but you think that just because somebody's not doing it your way, that it's the wrong way. So all of a sudden you're just cutting down everything around you. Right. And the reality of it is you really, we'll come here in the doctor's office and, shout in our arm about some local person doing something stupid. But as far as like, as a good rule, we try to never cut anything down, even like other chiros and stuff like that. Just a bad habit to get into. Experts value different forms of knowledge in their reasoning, which basically means, we're not like, in our triage, like we're embracing MDT, we're embracing neurodynamics, we're embracing DNS. And, these are maybe a little bit outside of traditional chiropractic. However, when integrated together, they're so powerful. Practical experience. So it's it's the one thing that if you're a young clinician, you don't have versus the person who's been out 20 years of practice. So, making your days more productive as you're working through your cases, kind of understanding, what worked and what didn't work. And I think a lot of people get this confused. They think that, if you're having a good result with the patient, then it must be a good thing. But you should be so hard on yourself that maybe the patient's 100% better, but like you're going back to your audits and the patient actually is not functionally better. And being really honest with yourself. Like I'm just such a critic of my own self. Like the patient might come in, they might think I walk on water. In the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, we haven't changed anything yet, So I think like being honest with yourself, being hard on yourself, and just understanding like at the end of the day, if you don't know where to start with improving joint mobility through manipulation, reintegrating trigger points through the central nervous system, changing tension and tone into soft tissues, and teaching them how to stabilize their body better. If you can do that, who's not going to get better, right? So
an orthopedic or, something that's outside of our realm, which is always good. And I think just to add on that, a young clinician, it's tough to gain those audits and then see them come through because you're worried about having a conversation. Am I running behind? Stuff like that. But I think like something you gave me advice early on was just pick one or two things. Don't get overwhelmed by the minutia. Just pick the two biggest things that you think are the biggest. keep monitoring them.
Yep.
And if they don't change, either find new audits or reassess, or change what you're doing. You know, just don't get snowed by, I think there's a tiny trigger point in the right, flexor hallucis longus when you're working on their headache.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that could be important in their case, but also don't be overwhelmed by the minutia and focus on the things that matter.
Yeah, because when I was your age in clinic practice, you would die if you saw how I would do a gait evaluation. The nuance of stuff that or the minutia that just didn't matter. And that doesn't mean that it might not matter down the road, but it's go after the low-hanging fruit, so go after the things that are going to have a big functional impact early on. I think that will suit you very well. And then, down the road, then we can start going after the little things. In those really difficult cases, they'll call it the 5%. It's going to be those little details that can matter. The best clinicians are able to pull from that. But the great clinicians are also, they know how to find success early on, and that's a critical thing. And Lynn Fay used to told me, is if you can give them the best joint play / adjustment they've ever had, they are going to be on board for whatever else you're trying to sell. And I think that is 100% accurate.
The other thing that does, that allows you to see patients quicker.
Yeah.
15-minute appointments.
Oh, yeah.
Not these hour-long appointments where you can't get paid for what you're doing, and then at the end of the day, we can't pay the bills.
Yeah,
so,
honestly, you don't see enough patients to get back. That's in the professional athletic world. They just don't see enough volume to really, to continue to improve. They can still improve, but what I'm saying is you want to find that perfect thing where you're seeing enough people in repetition to where you can continue to gain the skill to be able to recognize patterns. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be great clinicians, it is about pattern recognition and in being able to draw back on everything that you've seen in the past to know how to use that information to help you right now. It's no different than Tom Brady is, if we look at his athleticism now, I'm not saying he's a bad athlete by any means, but he's not the most athletic person. But what he has now, he's basically like an offensive coordinator out on the field. So, if he doesn't like the scheme of the defense, he can, call an audible at the time. So he's got a very systematic approach, but he's able to call an audible. You and I have a very systematic approach, but something's going to go wrong. Maybe we're taking him the wrong direction. Maybe we're just on the wrong track. So we have the ability to then call an audible in the treatment room to say, okay, let's rethink this. And then get the patient on board with you rethinking that. So
beautiful. It's like Joey Chestnut choking out a guy in the middle of his hot dog eating contest. Still got to 63. Come on.
That was so impressive.
Being able to snap back and forth. So let's go through maybe one or two more, and then we'll kind of go to the next.
Well, I think that maybe one that's worth talking about is the experts are patient-centered. I think that there can be a misunderstanding, because the one thing you're going to see in the literature right now is locus of control, which is basically that the patient should be guiding everything. To a certain extent, yes, but you got to watch that the inmates aren't running the asylum. I would say patients are kind of like water. They're going to take the easy way out. The average patient, what do they want from you? They want to see you one time, and they don't even want to pay you for that one time. Okay, so you got to understand that's what you're dealing with, right? So you also got to be there to set the guidelines. And the other thing, too, is I always tell the patients kind of jokingly, you're affecting my batting average. If I undertreat you and you walk out of here and you don't get a good outcome, you're going to walk around this town saying Brett didn't help me, and I don't want that. So I would rather overtreat you probably and make sure I get the outcome that I want than undertreat. But that doesn't mean that the patient isn't. We're still working on self-efficacy. They're still doing home exercise. There's still an accountability piece on the patient. So you don't always have to be kicking the patient out of your doors. You're just kind of there. Think of yourself almost like a boxing trainer. You're just kind of there, every so often to give them a little nudge in the right direction.
Beautiful.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Okay. So, and I think too, when we talk about becoming an expert at this craft, you're gonna have peaks and valleys. So, but as long as there's a positive slope of improvement, you're going to learn something new this weekend. You're going to have a moment where you're like, oh gosh, I literally know nothing about this. It's going to expose you. Then, over time now you learn how to do that skill. And then slowly but surely you have a positive slope of improvement. And this is basically how you build legacies in careers. It's just done day by day by day. There's no bad things. There's difficult people. There's difficult cases. I had to fire a patient last week just because like sometimes like if they can't get on board for what you need, you just can't do it. But in saying that, like most people, when shown, what it is we do, I mean, they're going to be on board for what we're doing.
What's the saying? Like never underestimate what you can accomplish in a day or accomplish in a lifetime, something like that. Like it's the same thing with our patients, with us, with all that kind of stuff.
I always tell myself, like, there is a career in every day, like literally. Because if you think about it, you're going to see about everything. If you've been in practice for 5 years, you've basically seen everything at that point. There's exceptions, but for the most part, myself, you, if you're in Dallas, if you're in Los Angeles, if you're in New York, we are literally seeing the same exact people. They just have different names.
Yeah.
So like that's the game with this is like, who can do better job of getting a quicker strike in pain, but more importantly, who can do the best job of changing function. So no matter where you are in the world, we have the same difficult people. I know everyone out there thinks, oh, in my town, I have all the chronic painters, but the reality of it is like people suck everywhere, basically.
Well, Brett, one of my favorite points of your talk at Parker was what we're going to talk about next, which is the 2 R's. So how does this play into what we try to do every day in practice?
Well, the first thing is, and I mean, like the research will tell you, you basically have 10 seconds from the second you walk through the frame of that door to establish rapport. All right. So one of the most important things is probably eye contact. So, we all know the people that get a little shifty when, you should be making eye contact with them. So I think like the first thing to work on would be, if it's appropriate, I'm not a big hugger. You're a hugger. A handshake. Good to meet you. I'm glad to have you here. And we're immediately start establishing rapport. I've kind of learned not to be pecking away at a computer, like to really look them in the eye and say, and I think this is a really good open-ended question to start with. What brings you to us? What is the reason you're here? Because that way you might expose like something bigger than what may just be their low back pain. Because if you say that, they might say, and I'm trying to be healthy. I got type 2 diabetes, and I'm trying to figure out. You should have an approach for all of those different things. So I think that's a great question to start with. And I think all great humans are really good at establishing rapport. Like if you're selling shoes, if you're selling coffee, wine, whatever it might be. Like people just have an ability to do that who do it well. And then this is probably one of the most important things you can do, especially on day one. So we have rapport. That happens in the first 1 minute you see the patient. That's basically do I trust this human being or not, right?
Snap decision on trust.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one would be reassurance, meaning you're here. Chiropractors are always on the low end of the totem pole as far as medicine, so they're already probably a little bit skeptical, especially if you're new in practice. So can you convey to them that you know what you're talking about, therefore they're reassured? Because let me give the thing you and I will see all day long, disc herniation. You say that word, they cannot wait to get out of the treatment room to start Googling, do I need an MRI? Do I need a surgeon? And you saying the right things. As an example, since today, Mrs. Jones, we've been able to take your symptoms, we brought them up to your back. We now know you do not need an MRI. In fact, it's contraindicated to get an MRI. We also know you surely don't need to see a surgeon right now. And, offering that reassurance to them right just takes that off the table. And then here's another one. I know you've heard me say this a million times, but we have all your next steps. Let's say that you're in that 0.01% that we're unable to help. I got a backdoor connection for the best guy in epidural steroid injections in St. Louis. We'll get you into the surgeon. So I don't want you to think that like if I weren't able to help you that we don't have all your next steps. We have all your next steps. So what am I doing there? I'm establishing reassurance. They're like, okay, so even if he isn't able to help me, he's got these next steps. Or I'll even maybe sometimes take a step further and say, what's funny, a lot of my patients, they sometimes think like my primary care would have better connections there. We got better connections here. So like that way we can, cover all those bases and offer them reassurance. But basically the second they feel reassured is the second the healing starts to occur. I mean, because some of these symptoms can be really, really scary. So if they know that they're not dying, you've ruled out all red flags and things like that, then that in itself, and we're used to back pain and stuff like that, but you can imagine like, if you've, never had like crazy ridiculous pain going down or like numbness in your arms, maybe you think you have MS, like me just telling you that you do not have MS can be very, very empowering. So, and that those two R's lead us to what I would call like a really good lifelong relationship. So I don't say it to all my patients, but what I'm kind of thinking is, okay, from this day until I die or they die, we're bonded now, so, and I would expect you, and I think if you're doing a good job of this, people will start asking you advice in every like area of healthcare, like, okay, so, who do I see for this? Who do I see for that? And you're doing a good job when they're asking you that question, because what they're basically telling you is, I trust you more than anyone else.
Right.
And when you do this well, you'll hear that all day long, So even if it's far outside of what it is that So those are good. So then that brings us to something that I really wanted to talk a lot about in that talk, which was, when we offer reassurance, we all have, you talked about the shoulder case, like you got your derangement, your adjustment where the patient gets up and it's literally like a Harvey Lillard moment where, it's just literally a miracle. But we all know that's not every case. Right. So you have your miracle on the continuum, but then you also have, on this other far end, surgery. And then in between, you have what I call a black hole. And this is where the typical evidence-based chiropractor is completely mismanaging these cases in that black hole. Because what happens is those patients need a change of function. And because you're too consumed with changing their pain, you have not done a good job of education. Maybe you're doing a good job of changing function, but you haven't educated them on it, right? So like if you're not able to show them a change in function even, then they'll be out the door also. Because like to a patient, what's, how much degree of range of motion do you need to have before a patient's going to realize it? This happens literally all day long. It's like, well, I think I'm about the same. And they basically went from zero movement to basically like turning their head like an owl. And you're like, what? Like, but like it's in your own body, so they don't know. So like you need to be there to kind of like point out these little functional goals. But so unfortunately you have, if you saw 1,000 cases of low back pain, let's say one will go to surgery. Let's say that there's 10 on the site miracles. How well do we manage those ones in between? And that determines how good of a clinician you are, because we're back to the intangibles. So you now have to use your words to describe what it is we're doing. The amazing miracles that we do as chiropractors, it's not honestly from pain. It's changing function. If we change function, we get an outcome with the pain. But I think that's like a big misconception. So we're back to who can do the best job of changing function and who can show that to the patient and who can do the best job of finding where the best portal of entry is for the case. And that brings us to another huge intangible, which is if you're gathering a ton of information as a clinician, how do you sort through that and make a really good decision? And this is what we call critical thinking. And I always pick on myself when we talk about this because I always jokingly say I got a memory that is scary in certain areas. So, but like that memory also can harm you because the whole American school system, chiropractic school, is all built on rote memorization. We do mnemonics, we sing songs to pass our boards. We do everything but actually learn how to do a cranial nerve exam, right? Yeah. Or whatever it might be.
What it means,
right. So in saying that, the best clinicians in the world, they almost think like engineers. They're able to, because it's not always so binary, which makes it hard. Like you gotta. It's almost like you're doing. It's like gambling, honestly. So there's an 80% chance that it's going to be this. Well, of course you're going to play the odds. You're going to push your chips in there. But what if it's the 20? So are you good enough to know? Oh shit, you're in this 20.
Yeah.
When you're young, it takes you 2 weeks to find out that they're into 20 or 1,000 press-ups to learn that. But as you get better and better, then you're able to sort through this information. And what I'm talking about right now in the sports world is actually called situational IQ. Mm-hmm. And this is where so many we see the prototypical, quarterback who's 6'4", high Wonderlic test. I mean, just crushes the combine. He gets in the NFL and
big
he just
hands,
sucks. Yeah, exactly. And is unable to perform. Then you got like a Tom Brady who barely gets drafted. who, I mean, just against all odds has somehow like persevered through. And then he's got a brain, and I can tell you right now, without knowing Tom Brady though, his situational IQ is he's able to recognize patterns better than anyone else in the history of the game. He's had some things kind of fall, like as far as, the Patriots and Belichick, but also but you also see it with like a Michael Jordan, a Wayne Gretzky. These people, they have an ability to, and it's almost like magic. Bobby Fischer is a chess player I always use the example of pattern recognition. They've seen it one time in this way, so when they see it a little bit differently, that spikes or puts up their antenna that they need to do something. Meaning, you do your neuro exam or you're working with the patient, you're like, well, this looks different. I don't know exactly what you have, but because this is different, I know that something else is going on. And you'll find you start chasing that down. It's like I had this conversation with the patient yesterday over the phone, like ANA, which is a marker, an inflammatory marker in blood work for autoimmunity. Sometimes it's a gateway into a lupus diagnosis or rheumatoid arthritis. Though, a lot of medical doctors will say, oh, that can be positive. You follow that patient for the next 5 years of your life, you'll see something pop up, right? So, and that's kind of, what we're seeing in function. Like, you'll see something just a little bit different and off, and that's what's telling you that it might require another referral, more imaging, maybe a medical referral, orthopedist, something like that.
Yeah, I love it. Beautiful.
Yeah, so that's the thing we talk about. So I think the thing to start to work on would be, how do we get better at critically thinking? And again, this is hard because there's, think of the sports world. There's been so many good. We were talking about Jamarcus Russell the other day, like number 1 draft pick. This dude, could throw 70 yards from his knees. Number 1 draft pick out of LSU, but then when he got out there, it was couldn't figure it out. So, as doctors, we need to figure it out. We need to be the ones that are basically teaching our brains how to systematically work through this. And if you can do that, I think you get world-class results. And it took me a while to figure it. It took me a while. I'm not trying to say I'm getting world-class results all the time. What I am saying, though, it took me a while to figure this out. Right. I just thought that if I was great at adjusting, great at ART, and great at rehab, that let the miracles come. You'll get a lot of people better, don't get me wrong. However, to perform at that level that is that next level, that's I think what it takes.
Because we always talk about half of our cases, anybody's going to get that person better. But then the cases that are outside of that realm,
if you're talking pain, the research will tell us do nothing and your pain will get better. That's hard to swallow. So that would be another reason to get better at changing function. Because the thought that a placebo doing nothing might do better than you messing it up is hard to take. So let's go ahead and keep changing function.
Yeah, and I think something that you've kind of instilled in us at Winchester Spine and Sport is just paying attention. That's how you can get better about critical thinking and situational IQ, is just paying attention to what's in front of you. If you're just droning about your day, patient by patient by patient, it's impossible to get better. It's impossible to see your results sometimes. Because sometimes you get bogged down. I mean, we always joke you get 5 no betters in a row, and
that'll be down.
Yeah, you'd be down, which you are. But then also, again, if you're not worried about that, if you're just changing function, it's just the fact that they're telling you that, and knowing that you're changing something. But if you can't get that little bit of positivity in your day or in that patient interaction, then man, you're in for a world.
I think too. I mean, I walk around with a chip on my shoulder, everyone tells me, I'm just used to being low man on the totem pole, so I felt the need to always probably outperform where I was. And then, be real competitive with your results. If you're in this long enough and you start noticing people who are just getting really good results, you'll see they take it seriously because there's that game within the game of being good at this. And again, you're going to have such difficult people that, especially when you get better at what you're doing, you're going to have a day full of difficult people. So being able to navigate through that group of people is a whole different ballgame. But
yeah, it's there. Yeah. Okay, what a good conversation. I love it. Maybe, Brett, do you have one more, just a tip on what we talked about? So you got the 2 R's, obviously building rapport and then gaining reassurance or putting reassurance in right at the end to build a relationship. But then we kind of talked about how to get better at it. But what maybe one other thing that really helps you or have helped you get to where you are?
I think too, a good starting point is, are you changing your audits? I mean, that's a great starting point. So there's 3 things that I would say when you walk into a treatment room you want to check for. Mechanics, that means like you walk into the room, the muscle tension tone functions better, the joints moving better, there's more end range, whatever you're doing to assess for that. We're chiropractors, so a lot of us will be using joint play. What was their functional goal? So let's say that they weren't able to run, they weren't able to sleep, whatever it might be, and going right after that, instead of asking them, falling away from like, how are you doing today? Which is basically, they're going to think that means their pain. And then the third and final thing would be, at some point, you're going to learn about their pain. They're usually going to tell you. If they don't, you can certainly ask. But I purposely, that's what's so liberating about it, is when the patient realizes that you really don't care about their pain. You care about changing the function. And that is like an amazing moment as a clinician to have. If it's a McKenzie case, of course, you're needing to see where their symptoms are. But when we're in that stage of trying to change function, so maybe I could leave you with this, which would be, what are some audits? This doesn't mean that they have to be yours, but this is what we use here. Joint play, trigger points, tone and tension and soft tissues, which basically means length and soft tissues also. Whatever functional test you're doing, maybe it's FMA, FMS, whatever in that category. And then don't forget about just a good old-fashioned neurologic examination. So your deep tendon reflexes, maybe muscle testing could be in there. Superficial abdominal reflex would be an example. So cranial nerve function, blind spot check, whatever you're into, but have something that you can come back to show the patient from a functional standpoint that they are in fact getting better. Beautiful.
And as Mark King would say, systemize it, and do it every time, get better at it, and know it's there.
Can I add one thing to Kinger's quote? I think you need, I really believe this, you need a systematic approach with the ability to call an audible. That's what I would say.
Beautiful. What a good way to spot. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll have more like it in the future. And as always, thanks for being awesome. An awesome audience, and for hanging with us and going through our growing pains. And sometimes our audio sucks and our video sucks, but we truly are doing this out of a book bag and as simple as possible, and that's what makes it so awesome and why we love it so much. So
we've spent way more on the bottle of wine that we're typically drinking than on our equipment.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So anyway, guys, stay tuned. We got a lot of awesome
great guests coming.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. So have a great day and enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Gestalt Education Show. If you liked it, share it. Subscribe to it, send it to your friends, send it to someone that needs to hear this message. We really want everyone to be able to tune in and get the best clinical advice that they can, which we're hoping that we're giving to you with these special guests. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or if you have any suggestions on upcoming conversations, let us know. For a list of our upcoming courses, we're adding them all the dang time. So go to gestaltedu.com, click on courses, and they'll all be right there for you. All right, have a good day.